Hi, welcome back. I'm here with Vic Akosile, Senior HR Business Partner at Novetta. Vic, how you doing?
Doing well, Al, doing well. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing, under the circumstances, hanging in there. Got my kids in the next room, making sure that there's no leaf blowers that go off, out in the neighborhood. But definitely first world problems. How you holding up there in DC?
Good, good, good. We're right in the center of crazy town, everything tends to happen and revolve around here, but we're taking it one day at a time, right? With everything like that's going on, that's all like you can do, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's just jump right into it. I mean, the Black Lives Matter protests there in DC, there's a pandemic going on. The world is shifting. And so what's happening for you in your organization, and what do you see there specifically in DC?
Yeah, so I think, like you have to look at this with a bit of context and with a bit of longevity as well. That, kind of what's happening now with Black Lives Matter is it's one occurrence in a long war, like that we've like been having around, equality, human rights, civil rights. In any war, there are turning points in the battle, right? In any war, like there's like the battle of this, there's the battle of this, there's the battle of that. But there comes a time when there's the battle that swings the momentum in
Yeah,
one way or another.
the landmark.
Yes, exactly, right? The Battle of Gettysburg, or
Yeah,
this revolution or some sort, right? Where there is so much momentum in one way or another that momentum, it doesn't swing back like the other way, but it carries it over,
yeah,
right? I believe that what we're experiencing now is that momentum swinging in one direction to really start to make that change, right? And
yeah.
it's how I know, or why I like believe this is so, is because businesses can no longer stay on the sideline, right?
Yeah.
And and you're talking about like America, we're a very obviously capitalist society where business drives a lot of the decisions that happen in our society.
Correct.
So, and with again, that's why I said, let's not discount social media, but with the advent of social media and people being able to kind of be like the free press in our like society, all right, now that businesses have to kind of answer and be accountable to the things that happen in like the world, they can no longer stay silent. To me, that is where I see the fact that now businesses have to either choose to stay silent or choose to speak up, and choosing to stay silent is a choice as well. That's where I think the paradigm shift has occurred, where prior to, it was all about the people against like the government, against society. Businesses kind of just stayed out of it because they're like,
Right.
this is happening, but I still need like to do my thing. Now businesses are coming out to say, oh, we like stand with this. We believe this is wrong. This is what we believe in, right? You can no longer stay silent. And I think that will be the key, the differentiator this time around. Call me a hopeful optimist, Al, but that's what I
No,
believe.
I think you're spot on. Let's run with that just for a minute, because I am really at this point in my life and my career where I have the ability to influence at senior levels, and I have taken what I have reflected on as a virtuous approach, but I would challenge myself to say it's been largely a safe approach. I've been nudging people to define well-being and more about, engagement more about well-being, and think about individual capacity, and think about also what feedback means, and defining that to honor which are all good. But at the end game, when we have businesses influencing political, not only discourse, but decision making, they are like guiding the policies in this country. I find myself needing to be more assertive. And as this has, to our earlier point, this movement has given me strength to take that level of assertiveness and to another level. Because I think if I don't lead it, if we don't, people who are not Black, don't lead the conversation, engage the conversation, facilitate the discussions, and help drive change together with the Black community, then I don't see it happening. It can't be all on the Black community, can't be all on the non-Black community. We need to get there together. So
in America, I mean, African Americans make 13% of the population, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there is no way that this can change. There's a concept of a tipping point, right? There's 13% is not enough for a tipping point, right? So I think that you are absolutely right. It's the strength that we find in these pockets. It's the strength that we find online, right? It's the things that we see, the stories that we hear that enable us to take that extra step, right? For me, I'll be honest, I would not be someone who saw myself going out to protest, But when I read the stories, I saw the stories, I saw the things, right? We're human, right? And we know that this is impacting other people's livelihoods, right? And to see somebody else's life, impacted in a way that's moving, right? And that's why, I said, let's not discount like the social media, because a lot of this is made possible because people can share stories, right?
Yeah. And
the rate at which it's happened so quickly and so pervasively around like the world is because people can share stories. And in that storytelling, there is a bonding, there is a connectiveness, and that strength. And I think that, if that helps people like to do more, if that helps people like to take that extra step, each of those extra steps is what will make like the difference in the road ahead. So I think, that's just awesome, man. That's awesome.
Hey, we're in a good flow here. I'd just like to continue on with one more question on this topic, and I'm sure we'll come back to it, of course. I am just curious from your perspective, and we just touched on it. What is the role of business leaders to facilitate the discussions that you're talking about? Because there's kind of been, well, do you have them at school? Do you have them at home? Do you have them in the workplace? I would think all of the above, but when you talk about the workplace, they're said, well, that's kind of politics. Politics should stay over there. However, as I believe we both agreed, it's not about politics. It's about life. It's about how we interact. It's how about we honor each other's humanness and create an equity where people have the ability to achieve and generate wealth in a broader, context or upward movement within a particular organization. So the pointed question again, what do you believe organizations need to be doing to facilitate these discussions?
Sure. So I'll answer a question before I answer that question.
Okay.
It's why should organizations feel like they have to, right? Because as I said before, like they didn't have to. So why should they do it now, Al?
Yeah.
And I think what jumps out at me is there's the trust barometer survey that's done each and every year by Adamsen, which says kind of who do people trust, right? What are the entities that people trust? And more than their government, more than the news, more than nonprofits, the pendulum is swinging that people trust their employers. With that trust, to quote Spider-Man, Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Absolutely.
So that is the why, right? Because people are looking to their employers as a source of credibility and truth, right? So that's why. Now, what can be done about it, I think is, like multifold. One is what I think a lot of businesses are doing now, acknowledging that this is not a fake problem, that this is a real thing, that there are systemic and institutional barriers in our society that, for a large part were created intentionally, but perhaps for a large part went under discussed or, for various reasons not tackled with the feverishness that it should have been, right? So acknowledgement of the problem is first. Two, I think, is to find ways to support those impacted most by the systemic challenges, right? Mm-hmm. And what that I think looks like is, I know at our place we were talking about, like we realized that, hey, there are, certain that the people in our tech industry look a certain way. And the people, let's say, in our back office and support staff look a certain way, right? So how might we find ways to give those people who may want an opportunity in career in tech, find those pathways, right? There's a lot of great conversations and like discussions around apprenticeships now. One, because talent is hard to find, but two, because the diverse group of talent is also hard to find too, right? So what are ways that we could facilitate that? I think if you're a large business like Amazon, you have a lot of influence in workforce of the country than even some governments have, right? So what if Amazon said, hey, we're going to do apprenticeships specifically target at underrepresented populations in tech, right? All of a sudden, they're helping those inequities by facilitating pathways, to get there. And I think three, what comes to mind, and a lot of companies are already doing this, and I think this is probably the first thing that could happen, is to share and give accountability to your diversity statistics. And a lot of companies are already doing this, but I think this is why it's important. When you have to report out on a number, and we all know this, there is a tendency and a now kind of self-accountability as a leader to make that number better, right? Right. So if we're reporting constantly that, and this is real, I think in the tech industry on average, there's only about 5% or less in a lot of places. 5% is good. There's closer to 3 to 2% of African Americans who work in tech.
Yeah.
It doesn't look bad during this time, right?
Yeah.
You may want to find a way to have interventions to make that number look better, right? The great thing about KPI is that you can say we can either make that number go up or we can either make that number go down, right? So I think those are key ways, and there's a few other ways, but I think that those are easily accessible ways that businesses can begin to do things.
Well, good for you. And I can't celebrate those enough. And just picking up on the last point in particular, it's there's systemic challenges, meaning it goes all the way into the pipeline, deep. It starts with grade school. It even starts arguably earlier than that. So how can we remedy it? And many people throw their arms up. Oh gosh, it's not my problem. Everything has to change. Yet we have to take responsibility for our element of the process, our element of the value chain, if you will. Yeah. And so, it is a heavy lift. It is going to take concerted leadership over time. I just celebrate what you just shared as well, is that we have to acknowledge across the board that there's a problem.
Yeah.
I learned the other day, I went to college in the 80s rather, and I learned that, I'm going to misstate the statistic. I just know in order of magnitude. I believe the Black student population at the University of California, Berkeley was roughly 10% or something like that when I went to school in the 80s. And it was similar, I would imagine, at UC Davis, where I went to school. And so I've learned that it's 1% now. It's and it's because the programs have fallen away that allow affirmative action, enabled students who are underrepresented to go. And I heard that, and it was mind blowing, because so much of my richness in I didn't know, to be totally honest, I didn't really know who Nelson Mandela was before I went to college. So now I'm talking to Black people about Nelson Mandela and apartheid and Tiananmen Square happened. I'm like, wow, there's a big world out there. So that diversity empowered me in my journey, and hopefully I imparted some of my perspective onto others. I'm half Mexican, but I don't show up in that way. I show up as a white man. And however, I have certain experiences that, both family and directly, that have contributed to how I show up in the world. But we need to have that forum. And right now, employers, again, to echo what you shared, have a role to play. And now it invites the question, do they have the courage to facilitate those conversations on an ongoing basis? And, is it going to, again, to your point, are there going to be some accountability, measures around that? So let me ask you this question, since we're flowing here. I had the great honor of collaborating with the CHRO in writing her letter and forming her strategy on how she was going to deal with Black Lives Matter and the challenges that it presented her organization. Yeah. And we went back and forth in a very constructive way. She's a white woman. And she was thinking diversity and inclusion and belonging. And, I advocated, I said, I think this is really about safety. And I know you have a group around safety, but it's physical, emotional, and psychological safety. And I do not know how you frame it, in terms of your communication, but I think it's pretty fundamental like that. We're not talking about a nicety here. We're talking about people being able to walk to the parking lot in a safe way, walk into a room and not feel that they're going to be judged or ridiculed because of the color of their skin. So I'm not asking you to, agree or disagree. I'm just, how do you feel about that notion? And if you have another idea on how it can and should be positioned within organizations to achieve a beneficial outcome, very interested.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's not even like a matter of like agree or disagree. It's a different lens. And when I think of, obviously, Maslow's order of needs, safety is right there. Yeah. So I actually welcome that, because it stops being, as it's being portrayed in some places, a political issue or a Black issue. This is a human issue that gets down to the core of, am I okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, am I okay if? Am I okay when? Am I okay, in this, specific situation? So I think when you put it that way, it gives people a different lens to think, okay, I've been here, because you hear about it in the political arena, you hear about it in, like the Black Lives Matter movement, but you really need something to help people relate it back to themselves, right? And I think that's what that may help do. But I'm curious to know what the reception was, either from her or if you heard back from her folks.
It's been positive. Before I comment on that, I got a chill when you were responding, because I realized in the questions that you posed rhetorically, they're the exact same questions we asked in response to COVID-19. Are you okay? How are you? How can I help? Those are the exact same questions. Correct me if I'm wrong. We argue we should be asking, not only Black people, but those who have maybe unconsciously been perpetuating it, and having the openness to learn. And okay, hey, yeah, you're right. This isn't good. How can we, help? I believe that's a more inviting way to the conversation than, oh, damn, there's this Black Lives Matter thing. I got to deal with this now. And and grumbling about it. And while I don't know anybody personally who's doing that, I imagine there's a lot of people who are struggling with it.
It feels like a problem that they, for an executive that, everything was going well, then all of a sudden a problem came into their lap that they were never expecting, and now they have to address, and they just don't know how, right? Yeah. There is, okay, I do understand, but that's why I think discussions like this are important because I don't think the expectation is that, Black people expect people to just know what to do. I think the expectation is you are open to listening to what may help, right? And I think that that approach there of being open to listen, being open to understand, being open to just sit there and not say anything because you don't understand, right? Right. So and understanding that I think this is one area that at times folks either they don't like get it, or as soon as like they get it, they're like, oh my God, right? The the concept of innate privilege, or on the opposite end, almost the robbery of a normalcy, right? Where a lot of times I come into the room and I have to be conscious of my Blackness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
because I'm either the oldest I'm sorry, like the only Black person in like the room. And I have been very fortunate to grow up in Washington D.C., where there's a lot of like diversity. I also have a very rosy outlook in the world. So there probably have been times when I've been discriminated against, and I just said, oh, that's kind of weird. Oh, hope he had he just probably had an off day, right? So, but so I know there is some fortune in that, but I think again, taking it back to the safety, taking it back to the humanity that like, of nothing of your own, you now have to be extra conscious and aware of something you had no choice over all the time, unless you're with people who look like you. That's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. So I actually think that that's a very a cool way to convey the humanity of like the situation, because it gets at that basal like need that we all have to feel safe in the environment that we are, right? So yeah.
Can I just fast forward, because I am personally struggle's not the right word, because I can see it in my own life. However, when I think about societally and organizationally, what does great look like? What does like, hey, we're doing well here look like? Is it that we've hired more Black people, or more, elevated more women into leadership roles? I like and appreciate the point you put forth around KPIs. They're published out there. There's a level of accountability both internally and publicly, if that is the case with a particular metric. So my pointed question is, well, just to focus on organizations for a second,
Okay.
are where they are. And I don't believe, in the leaders that I've spoken with, they really have a clear idea of what success or what getting better looks like. Because they think it's just so insurmountable. And like we talked about earlier, it's like there's so much, therefore I'm just going to wash my hands of it, and I'm going to blame it unconsciously or consciously on something else.
Right.
So the pointed question to you, I mean, because if we have an idea of what like positive movement looks like, I think the roadmap to get there will become clearer. I see many putting together roadmaps with not really understanding where they're going.
Right.
So, any ideas, thoughts there?
Yes. And you said a term and you used it for something else, but I'm going to borrow that term and use it here.
Right.
Positive movement, right? In the Western society, there is a dream. In America, it's called the American dream, right? That you work hard and you advance and you grow, right? And I think, and I believe, actually, not I think, I believe that is what the goal should be. How many people of underrepresented populations or minority are seeing growth in the various assets within our company. And you mentioned a few, right? Obviously, the people that we hire, right? What does our leadership team look like? However, I would venture that there's one that probably tells a greater story than hiring like a bunch of like minorities and putting someone in a leadership role because like you feel like now like you have to have this, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many minorities are advancing or being promoted, right? That's movement. That's positive movement,
Right.
When you look at that, you know, because what tends to happen is this, and I wrote a blog about this, right? You know, there's kind of an old boys club, right? At times, there's a certain portion of career advancement that's network and relationships, and a lot of times, to me, that's kind of like the crust of inclusion. That, you know, minorities may not make those relationships because they don't see somebody like themselves there, right? So, who tends to naturally rise up to like the top are the same people who are there right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the best way to measure, are we making progress for growth for underrepresented populations, is our underrepresented populations in our company growing? Are they advancing? And I think that is another metric that may not be as closely measured.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think that is change, right? When you move from one space to like another space, that is actual change and that's actual growth. And I think when you compare that growth to, let's call it like the default population, or even the overall org population, right? What you want to see is at least, hey, these people are either growing at the same rate, or because you know there is inherent systematic issues, right? They're growing at a faster rate to get you to that point where there is, you know, like representation in leadership, you know.
So what I'm hearing is, and I celebrate it, but I know there's going to be pushback societally and from organizational leaders. They're saying, okay, if I'm hearing it correctly, you know, there's going to be a fixed number of spots. The people who are most qualified to fill those spots based on a skill-based educational level are going to be non-Black, just by sheer numbers going back into the pipeline that we've talked about before. So if we're going to elevate those numbers all the time, we as an organization need to disrupt the norm, and we have to consciously elevate Black people, and arguably women and potentially Latino Americans as well, and to build a more equitable representation among leadership roles over time. Now, I imagine white people or people who, you know, are part of the establishment who, you know, have benefited from this perpetuation of exclusion, will raise their arms up and say, wait a minute, you know, I went to school, I did that, I pressed all the should buttons. And, you know, obviously they've had this, this privilege. And so they're going to have to get on board with making room, making these pathways available to others. And that is not going to be sold unless leaders form a confidence-inspiring, inclusive narrative to say that it's an and, not an or. That, you know, but it's going to be disproportionate over time, like it's been disproportionate for the past hundreds of years. So would you agree with that? Is there any nuances like you would like to pick up on and elaborate on?
There is a nuance, and the nuance is not to assume that this isn't a data-driven decision, right? That it's a decision that's just, we're doing this because we need more Black people like in higher roles. As I said, the first thing that you have to do is really compare and see, is there a problem, right? You know, because, but my assumption is that a lot of places, especially like the larger companies, like the tech companies, like the pharma companies, will clearly see that, comparative to the talent that, let's say, graduates from higher education. Let's say if there's, 20%, or let's say 15%, 10% of people who graduates, in higher ed who are African Americans are, Black or Latino. Oh, well, we only have at our tech company, 4% of our engineers are that. Okay, so now you may want to look at, why, right? So it's not, is this intentional? It's like, okay, well, why is that, right? So I think asking like the questions of why is it that this is an output, but this is what happens occurs. Perhaps it could be in, unconscious bias of like, this is what I see as a software like developer or as a program like manager, because all the other folks look like this. So as a recruiter, unconsciously, I don't know, I may be trying to hire for cultural fit, right? And that's what happens sometimes. That could be it, right? So who knows, right? When we look internally, we see, okay, maybe it's not a hiring problem. You all hire probably the, like the right amount, or, like whatever like the amount is, but you don't see that level in leadership. Why is that, right? What are the components that drive promotions at your company? Right? Compare that with minorities, compare that with, non-like minorities, and see what are the disparities. And then that's when you start to realize, like for example, as I said, one part is that there's a part of job growth that is a network basis, who like you get that face time like for leadership.
Yep.
Are African Americans, are like minorities, are they making those same kind of connections with certain kinds of people? Doing network like analysis, like to see, who are those people that talk, who are people who promote it talk to most, and are our minorities getting exposure to those people, right? So it doesn't have to be so subjective. There is a data-driven approach to this. If we ask ourselves why, and we allow the same people, analytics, the same, data-driven mindset to help us answer these questions. So that's like the nuance there, but at the big picture, we are trying to discover where the inequities lie.
Well, your audience. You're just trying to make me feel good now.
But there's no other way. Like,
no, I 100% agree.
Exactly. I mean, if just like, and like we can try like this kind of, but it's still how people feel. Just like there is privilege, for, or white privilege where, things may happen as easily. There are people, like I have, obviously like a lot of white friends who feel like, well, it's not fair. I didn't do those things that, systematically impacted, African Americans, yet I'm suffering for it, right? Or I have to bear that brunt. That's a hard pill to swallow for anybody, right? So that's why I think like the data-driven approach to show people, this is what the labor market looks like. This is what ends up with us. These are people who get promoted. These are people in leadership. And then invite people to say, tell me what's wrong with this picture. Right?
And tell me what's wrong and how do we then fix it? And it's going to be fixed not in one fell swoop by one program in one quarter. It's going to be a lift over time. And I never really liked that term, heavy lift, but for some reason in this context, it's really been top of mind for me. It seems very appropriate because it's not going to be easy and it's going to take time. And so again, my pointed question to you, and this might be through your own experience or your ideas that you'd like to see take shape, is this process that we're talking about, looking at the data, assessing the problem, identifying a future state, creating a roadmap to get from here to there. That's going to require a few things. Number one, of course, it's going to require the data and someone to actually do the analysis and bring it to the fore, but it's going to require the space and time to actually consider it. Yeah, it's not, I see so many people, and I know the pandemic is throwing you know, another challenge in the whole thing, but I see so few creating the space, you know, whether it be an offsite, you know, because that's what comes to mind when you talk about create the space, but really a recurring offsite, recurring meeting, you know, say, okay, this is our focus of this discussion. We have a problem. What's our solve for that? How are we going to track progress over time? How are we going to hold each other accountable? You know, that I don't see happening. And ultimately, and this is the last point, it's going to take a leader or a group of leaders, but ultimately a leader to say, this is a non-negotiable. This is what we're going to do. And while there's been a lot of nice talk from business leaders, and I know PR firms and communications groups have got their fingerprints on it because they have nice backgrounds and they have, you know, they're all meme ready, right? It's like there needs to be that ongoing conviction from leaders. So that's my point of view. I don't see it to the level that I would like personally, because I just see kind of it being handed off to, like, again, the PR folks. But what's your hope? I mean, what would you like to see happen? Because you said you were hopeful before. You believe this is a, you know, a true shift getting over the top. What else, you know, am I missing for that to actually hold true?
Yeah, so I think right now, what we're seeing is that there is a flashlight, a spotlight on diversity within your organization, right? Where it's now something that's being reported on stockholders or shareholder reports, right? There's a lot of research and a lot of information that shares around the correlation between diversity and organizational performance. Right? A lot of, you know, with the new wave of, let's call them, you know, investors now, even the, a lot of them, they look at your corporate social life responsibility. People want to invest in companies that are doing, not just making profit, but are doing good things, right? And that's why I think the exposure of the KPIs and the accountability there is one part of what makes this piece work, right? Because there is selfishly, there is a personal image you as a leader want to be able to say that you are doing. So again, having a KPI that's very public, that's very much so in the, you know, like the news and like the airways, you know, there is a accountability to that metric that you want that number to swing a positive way, positive movement, you know, like, like the term like before. So that's one component like that makes me hopeful. You talked about, you know, something here around, you know, creating space, you know, what do, you know, like leaders do, and, you know, kind of, you know, thoughts like around that. I definitely think that, you know, this has to start from the top. It has to be something that the senior leadership champions. And I think, as I said now, there is more pressure for businesses to say something, to not stay silent. So you can say the market has influenced a lot of businesses to now take this issue as, this is an important issue. What are we doing about it? Now, from the top, it's now an issue, right? So that we have to shine some light on. A lot of organizations, if they have like the resources to, or make like the resources to put, you know, obviously a diversity and inclusion, you know, a senior leader inside of their executive leadership. Right? However, and, you know, bringing it back home to, you know, like the work that we all do, right? There is a ambiguousness, sorry, the word ambiguousness.
I'm with you.
Of what to do. And the context of that is very specific to each organization. But to figure out what to do, a lot of times you have to figure out why are things happening the way they are now. And that is where I think, like the data driven approach and the analytics mindset can truly add value to this question that no one knows what to do about, Al. The question that people are like, what do we do? I don't know. Is this possible? Is this right? Is it a HIPAA violation? Is it like HR is smack dab in the middle of answering one of the most prolific questions that have faced our modern society within the workplace, right? So exploring the why of how things happen, from hiring to performance to promotion to leadership, exploring kind of like they call it survival analysis. If you have this is like the talent pool, this is what flows through, these are all maybe there's none at the top. Why does that happen? And then in the answering of the why is where you figure out the what. Now we can try to take out bottlenecks and things like that. So that's why I'm hopeful, because there's a lot of things coming together to culminate, like to go back to an early analogy, this big turning point, a battle within this entire war of, equality.
So let's take that, because I 100% agree across the board. I want to talk about who can or should be in the room. And when I say should, I don't like that word, but who would you recommend be in the room? And let me put it this way, is in the midst of the pandemic, certainly as it first started, all these tiger teams or task forces got created. To deal with remote work, to deal with just in some cases right sizing the workforce, in some cases dealing with those who would still come into work, or whatever, a range of issues. And these groups have been very diverse in representation from different functions, facilities, HR, legal, operations, finance, on down the line. And as I see them evolve, many organizations are thinking about keeping these intact. And as well, and I have long advocated for something like that, but HR ultimately, given the data that they have access to, in my view, are uniquely qualified to facilitate those discussions because they have the people-related data, and some of which needs to be secured. So my pointed question to you, let's say those types of task forces exist. Would you see those playing a role in this, or would this be, another HR leadership team agenda item that would be outside the broader sphere? I mean, what would be your ideal approach that you would like to see in organizations?
Sure. So when I think about that question, I think about what's already being done now, and is that working? So what's being done now is within HR. It is, something that HR tends to lead. And a lot of times it does not get beyond the point of reporting what has happened. That's not working. So on the flip side, if we see this as a crisis, what did we do in crisis kinds of situation? We formed teams, not just any teams that could influence and make decisions about certain things within the workforce, right? Teams that the relevant people who the crisis was impacting were on those tiger teams, those crisis teams, right? So in my mind, if organizations see this as a crisis and the opportunity to come out of this crisis, better, stronger, wholer, right? You will put together those crisis teams. And obviously HR is in the room, right? But also senior executive to make the choice to say, you have my authority, you have my, gavel, make this happen, and this is what I want to see. That should be in the room too. But I caution it. I caution senior executives to hold their tongue in that room, because obviously their influence has a lot of weight, and do a lot of listening and a lot of empowering at the end, right? Yeah. Because the answers aren't always going to come from you, but the empowerment to take action on the answers will come from you.
That's
right?
priceless advice. And particularly, most leaders are not Black. So, and nor are they epidemiologists and statisticians who can read data and predict how it's going to spread. So I think you're absolutely right. They have an increasingly elevated responsibility to listen, learn, adopt that growth mindset that Carol Dweck talks about so eloquently. So, Vic, I could talk to you for the rest of the day, and I'm sure we'd solve at least one problem in the world. But, maybe not this one, but Vic, any closing comments before we sign off here?
I think that, again, I'm very hopeful for the energy that's been galvanized around this issue. And my mom, has this saying: things don't change unless things start changing. And I think what we're seeing now is things are changing, and then there's a reaction to that. And, and again, I think the key difference here is that businesses can no longer sit on the sidelines, because people are very attuned and adept to their silence.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If there hasn't been a business that's put out a statement or something to say something to acknowledge what's happening, their employees are going to start to look at them like, what does this mean that you didn't say anything? Right. So, I think there's a lot of awareness, because people are looking to their businesses or to their employers as that space of trust.
Yeah.
So with great trust, with great power comes responsibility, and our organizations, for better or for worse, are the movers and shakers in our economy and in our society. So I think that is the key differentiator here. And I think that, for those places that are looking to figure out what can I do, it's a systemic problem. It's a systemic challenge. It's very akin to an organizational challenge inside of your own business. How would you approach that? You start to observe, you start to look at data, and you start to do a lot of listening. I think that's that's what I would charge people with, here today. And I think progress can be and will be made on this album.
Well, Vic, I love your mom's quote. She obviously is an awesome person for bringing such an awesome person in the world. So, hey, man, thank you really for sharing your insights, ideas, and being who you are. And thanks for sharing with me and our listeners today. So, hope to see you in person before too long there in DC, huh?
Yes, Al.
All right, you be well. I'll talk to you. All right, cheers. Bye.